Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Torah studies for the Torah portion of Va'era. And we're going to continue our exploration of the Rebbe's unique approach to analyzing Rashi and to uncover the depths of meaning, the layers of meaning, and of course, the practical application as well. The two rules that we're going to focus on in tonight's class, rule number one, Rashi is not an anthology of Medrash. When he quotes a Medrash, it's only to answer a problem in Pshat. Pshat means the straightforward interpretation of the verse that if you were reading the biblical text from beginning to end, you have an understanding what's taking place in the verse. So anytime that Rashi quotes a Medrash, it's because that Medrash helps to explain what is the straightforward interpretation. That's a key. Another rule, Rashi usually quotes from a source verbatim. Deviation is intentional. It means he's trying to say something slightly but significantly different. So these are the two rules to have in mind as we are going to explore the class. So let's get to the Parsha. At the end of last week's Parsha, Moshe is given a job. He stands before Paro and he says to Paro, "Let my people go." The end of the exile of the Jewish people is finally at hand. They're going to be redeemed. They're going to be a free people, and they're going to the land of Israel. Paro's response to that is, who? Says who? God? Your God? God? Never heard of him. Don't know what you're talking about. And he says to the Jewish people, you guys are lazy. You're a bunch of lazy bums. That's why you don't want to work. And what Moshe actually told Paro was, you're going to go to the desert and you're going to pray for 3 days. You're going to have a little holiday. You guys are lazy. You're on vacation. You're looking for a 4-day weekend. Not happening. So what does Paro do? He says that the Jewish people no longer are going to have the items, the supplies to make the bricks and to complete their slavery. Not only are they slaves, but they have to go now and find their own materials as well. So the Jews are subject to absolutely back-breaking labor. The pain, the physical pain, on the highest level. And the Jews complain to Moshe. They say, Moshe, what on earth did you come here for? Since you came here, you made it worse for us. Moshe, of course, is just broken. These are his people. He came to save them, and it's worse. So what does he do? Defiantly. He stands before God and he says to God, why have you done bad to these people? Why have you done bad? From the moment you sent me, it's much worse. That is last week's Parsha. This week's Torah portion begins with God's response. Now God is answering the question of Moshe, why have you done bad to these people? And we're going to begin with the text of God's response, the beginning of the Parsha. And God spoke to Moshe and said to him, I am God. And I appeared to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov by the name of Kel Shakai. But by my name, Havaya, which is the Yud, the Hey, and the Vav and the Hey, the Tetragrammaton, I was not known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. And also I have heard the moaning of the Israelites, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I've remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to the Israelite people, I am God. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I'll redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary judgments. And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. And I'll bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I will give it to you for an inheritance. I am God. So this is God's response to Moshe's complaint. Moshe complains, why are you doing bad to these people? Here we have God's response. We need to analyze it. We need to analyze it, and then we're going to put ourselves in the mind of Rashi. In terms of an answer to Moshe's question, verses 5 through 8 make a lot of sense. Let's go through verses 5 through 8. Verse number 5. And I've heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I've remembered my covenant. So Moshe complains, why did you make it bad for the people? God says, I heard them. I know their pain. And he says, say to the Israelites, I'm going to free you. I'm going to take you out. I'm going to bring you to the land of Israel. So verses 5 through 8 are very clearly a response to Moshe's plea. It's hopeful. It's positive. It's uplifting. Moshe has an incredible message to bring back to the people who are suffering. However, what about verses 2 through 8? Sorry, verses 2 through 4. How is verses 2 through 4? God didn't reveal himself to the patriarchs with one name. Now I'm revealing you another name. What does that have to do with anything? So here we have Rashi. Now, in order to understand Rashi, we have a little bit of an introduction. God has different names. The name Hashem, Havaya, which is usually spelled a yud with a hey and a vav and a hey, that is the name that means trustworthiness. It means God is eternal. God represents truth. If God says something, there's nothing more real, there's nothing more true than that. The name Shaddai is the name that God revealed himself to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's a different name. So what does God say to Moshe? I revealed myself to the patriarchs with the name Kel Shakai. But to you, I'm revealing myself with the name Havaya. With this little bit of introduction, and again, if anything doesn't make sense, just unmute yourself and go for a question. Rashi is now going to help us understand these verses. Rashi says, and I appeared to the patriarchs by the name of Kel Shakai. I made certain promises to them, and in the case of all of these, I said unto them, I am Kel Shakai. But my name Havaya, I was not known to them. I was not recognized by them in my attribute of keeping faith, because of which my name is called Havaya. This particular name denotes that I'm certain to substantiate my promise. Indeed, I made promises to them, but did not fulfill them during their lifetime. So Rashi explains to us, why is God responding to Moshe with this business about names? How are names relevant? So he explains to us that actually the names are very significant. That the name with a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey, right, means the truthfulness of God, the trustworthiness of God. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did not know that name in relation to the promise of slavery and exodus from Egypt. Why? For a very simple reason. They did not have a time machine. They lived a few hundred years before the Jewish people were slaves. So therefore, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did not know God by this name of truthfulness because these events never took place. These events never happened. But God is telling Moshe, you, on the other hand, you are being spoken to by God with the name Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, which represents truthfulness, trustworthiness, and the promise that I made to them back then, which they just had to have faith in for the future, you will see in the most real time. So Rashi explains the difference in the name. And now Rashi continues. It all makes sense. It all fits with the context. Therefore, in accordance with that promise, say to the Israelite people, I am God, who is faithful in my promise. I will free you, for so did I promise them, and afterwards shall they go out with great substance. So, what is Rashi's explanation of these verses? Very succinctly, the Torah mentions the patriarchs and their relationship with God as an introduction and a rationale for why God will redeem the Jewish people. It connects their redemption to God's promises to the patriarchs, showing how this moment is the fulfillment of those earlier commitments. is referencing previous verses. What did it say? It says, and Moshe returned to God and said, God, why have you brought harm to this people? Why have you sent me? From the moment I have come to Paro to speak in your name, he has harmed this people, and you have not saved your people. Rashi is now going to quote a medrash that's going to address this issue. Look at the text of Rashi. Our rabbis expounded this section as referencing what precedes it. What Moshe said, why you have brought harm to this people. God told him, alas, for those who are gone, that is the patriarchs, and are no longer. I have reason to grieve the death of the patriarchs. Many a time did I reveal myself to them by the name Kel Shakai, and not once did they ask me, what is your name? But you said, if they ask, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Also, I set up, etc. And yet, when Avram wished to bury Sarah, he could not obtain a grave until he purchased one at a high price. So too in the case of Yitzchak, people fought him for possession of the wells that he had dug. Similarly, of Yaakov, it is stated he purchased a parcel of field in which to pitch his tent. Yet none of them criticized my dealings with them. While you say, why have you brought harm to this people? So Rashi brings a medrash that says, what is the explanation for what's taking place in these verses? God is saying to Moshe, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had so many issues, had so many problems, yet never did they complain to me. Not one time did they say, God, why are you doing this? Why are you making it so tough? Yet you, Moshe, you are complaining. So God responds to Moshe, telling him, the patriarchs did not experience the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, but you are going to see the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. We need to understand what's happening over here. Why was it necessary for Rashi to bring this interpretation? I saw the look on everyone's faces on the screen here so far. You were very happy with Rashi's first explanation. Right? Why did the Torah why did the Torah say that God did not appear to Abraham and Yitzchak with this name? And now he's appearing to Moshe to tell us it's a fulfillment of the promise. God promised Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, you, Moshe, are going to see it now. Beautiful. It's good. We understand. Why did Rashi all of a sudden bring this whole other interpretation that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov never complained? And Moshe, you are a complainer. What does this have to do with anything? Why add it? And if now we're going to continue, Rashi continues, and it's even more perplexing. It's even harder to understand. Oh, of course. Why is Rashi quoting the interpretation from the Medrash? What was wrong with the first interpretation? Rashi continues. However, this Midrashic exposition expounded, as it is said, my words are like fire, says God, and like a hammer shatters into many sparks. All right. Rashi brings a second interpretation, and then he rejects it. And he says, no, it doesn't fit into the literal implication of the verse, so forget about it, we're going to go with the other one. If a second interpretation is necessary, why dismiss it right away? Why did Rashi even quote it? Rashi should not even brought up the issue. So Rashi brings it up and rejects it. But by bringing it up, he's clearly not rejecting it, right? So how do we understand what's happening in Rashi? So we have another question here. The quote that Rashi brings is from it. It says, the school of Rabbi Shmuel taught, like a hammer shatters a rock, just as this hammer breaks a stone into several fragments. Do you recall the quote that Rashi just used? Let me see if I had it over here. Did I bring it over here? Yes. All right. And let the Midrashic exposition be expounded, as it is stated, my words are like fire, says God, and like a hammer shatters a rock into many sparks. Look at the source where Rashi quotes this from the Talmud. The school of Rabbi Shmuel taught, like a hammer shatters a rock, just as this hammer breaks a stone into several fragments. Rashi did not quote this directly. Rashi added to it. Rashi quoted the entire verse, which says that Torah is like fire. That was not here in this verse. And he adds that it's like sparks which fly. Why does Rashi deviate from the original text? Right? Why does Rashi deviate from the source and quote the entire verse? Rashi is extending the metaphor. The metaphor quoted in the Talmud is of a rock that is split, has many pieces. The Torah has multiple interpretations. However, Rashi adds this element of the many interpretations of the Torah being like sparks that fly. Now, before we continue, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page because, again, there's a lot of quotes, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of analyzing. I don't want anyone to be lost. If anyone is not on the same page, here's a moment. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. All right. Hopefully everyone here is on the same page.
I am actually missed the very beginning, but okay, I'm trying to catch.
All right. I hope that at least you're following the part that you were here for, and ultimately I will wrap it all up with a beautiful bow at the end. So all questions will be answered, Val.
Are you recording? Are you sending?
It is recording, so you will be able to watch it as well.
Oh, okay, good.
All of this additional element that Rashi is bringing, the Medrash, and not quoting it directly, all this information is to address a hole in the text. If you properly analyze the biblical text, you will notice that there is something completely missing. There's a blank space in the Torah. What do I mean by that? The Torah portion begins like this. In Hebrew, Vayedaber Elokim El Moshe V'yomer Lo Ani Hashem. In English, and God spoke to Moshe and said to him, I am God. Now, this might appear to you to be the most plain verse, a verse that's repeated dozens of times, if not hundreds of times in the Torah. God spoke to Moshe, saying God spoke to Moshe. It says it all the time. However, Rashi points out to us that this is not the same way as it said every single time. Rashi explains, and God spoke to Moshe. He spoke harshly with him because he had spoken so brazenly when he said, why have you brought harm to this people? So Rashi explains to us that any time it says in the Torah the words Vayedaber, and he spoke, it's harsh. It's a harsh expression. The word Vayomer, and he said, nice and pleasant. But Vayedaber means there is a rebuke that's taking place. We also have the name Elokim, as opposed to Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, which also represents a judgment a little bit. So these words both connote judgment and harshness. However, if you actually look at the verses, there's not one word that God says to Moshe that's harsh. There's not one word of rebuke. God says to Moshe that I revealed myself to Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov with the name Kel Shaddai, right? Which means a name which did not represent God's truthfulness because the events did not yet take place. They were hundreds of years away. But to you, I'm revealing myself with the name Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey because now it's going to happen. Now it's going to happen for real. Where's the rebuke? Where's the insult, right? God says to Moshe, it's happening now. I'm liberating them. They're going to be free. We're going to the land of Israel. Where is the rebuke? So Rashi explains to us. Rashi explains to us what's the rebuke. He quotes the Medrash. It's missing in the verse. It's not in the verse, but the Medrash explains what's the background, what's the missing information that God said to Moshe. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They had challenges. They had obstacles. They were frustrated. Not one time did they ever complain to Hashem. They had faith and trust in Hashem. But you, Moshe, you're complaining. Rashi is filling in the gap. He's filling in the hole in the text with the Medrash. All right, we said that already? Okay. So now we can start answering a bunch of questions. There is a missing piece in the puzzle that only the Drash explains, the second conversation between God and Moshe. In the literal and the most straightforward interpretation of the verse, it doesn't fit in. Right? This is a comment that is a midrashic style comment not a straightforward biblical verse comment. It's a drasha. This second conversation between God and Moshe is necessary to understand the story, but it remains drush. Number 3, in contrast to the Talmud, Rashi quotes the entire verse to support this idea of simultaneous interpretations. The rebuke is only conveyed through the Medrash. So this explains the strange wording of Rashi. Rashi says, I have this midrashic explanation, which fills in the gap in the verse. However, I'm rejecting it. Why am I rejecting it? Because it doesn't fit in the literal interpretation of the words. And that's what Rashi's focus is. Rashi's focus is on the literal interpretation of the word. But notice Rashi does not say I'm rejecting the interpretation. He says I'm rejecting the interpretation as pshat. I'm rejecting it as a literal interpretation. However, it still holds very, very true on the level of drush, on the level of medrash. It's all part of the same Torah. It's all one. And a spark flies. They fly all over the place. We know, God, unfortunately, from the fires, the wildfires. All it takes is one spark to fly with the wind across, and the devastation is going to be terrible. So Rashi is saying that Torah is like sparks. It flies in different directions. That means there's different genres. Not every question in the Torah is answered in the pshat genre. Sometimes you have to go deeper. Sometimes you have to peel back layers. And ultimately, you're going to find all the answers to your question. So it's not in pshat, it's in drush. And it's all part of the same one Torah, even though there's sparks, there's different layers of Torah interpretation. All right, any questions, comments on what we've said so far? We are going to now try to apply this information to the real world. All right, so we have analyzed Rashi, and we've explained Rashi and the layers and the depth of interpretation that Rashi is exactly the same thing that we need to apply to Moshe and ultimately all questions in life. Sometimes we experience something, we go through something, and we don't understand why it's happening. Why is life like this? Why are we experiencing this issue? Like Moshe. Moshe calls out to God and he says, why are the Jewish people suffering? You sent me here to save these people, and they're suffering. In our own lives, we may have experiences that we don't understand. What is Rashi telling us? Just because you don't understand it does not mean that there's no answer to the question, right? That we have to have faith, we have to trust in Hashem, and we have to dig deeper, and we dig deeper. If the answer is not pshat, if the answer is not straightforward, if the answer is not obvious, if the answer is not simple, there's layers and layers, and we need to peel back, we need to study more, we have to learn more. Whether it's an issue of Torah study, or whether it's an issue of some of the more existential challenges of life, we have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. The next text that I'm going to present you is this in the real world, and it's a quotation from Rabbi Akiva Wagner. My son Sender is in Rabbi Wagner's yeshiva in Toronto. Now, Rabbi Wagner unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. As a young man, he passed away from cancer, but he was a legendary rabbi, educator, and his children continue on the yeshiva that's in his name in Toronto. And he wrote an article in 2008 when terrorists...
I forgot to open the class.
Avi, is that you? All right. So he wrote an article in 2008 when terrorists stormed the Chabad house in Mumbai, India, murdered 6 people, including the Chabad shliach and his wife. And the pain that the Jewish world in general, but the Chabad world in particular, felt, how is it possible? How could it even happen? A rabbi goes somewhere to make a shul, to build a community, to reach out to their fellow Jews, to bring them home, and you get murdered for it? What kind of business is that? So Rabbi Akiva Wagner writes, but it happened. We cry out in unmanageable pain, in frustration, in anger, and in shocked disbelief. But then we bow our heads in humility and we accept. We move forward because one of the basic foundations of our religion is the conviction that God is infinite. And it would be arrogant and foolish for us to even dream of understanding him. And from time to time, things continue to happen that don't make sense in our book, that don't even seem to make sense in his book. And nonetheless, they happen. And we can only turn our tearful eyes heavenward and ask, it happened. We accepted it. Isn't it time to let us understand? Isn't it time for the era when, as Isaiah says, we will thank you for having been wrathful with us? This is an approach that has helped the Jewish people survive for 3,000 years. The pain, the challenges, the exiles, the pogroms, the expulsions, the inquisitions, the terrorism, like the Jewish people who've had experienced pain. This is the oldest question in the book. Why do bad things happen to good people? Right? But what is the answer to the question? What did God say to Moshe? God said to Moshe, Ani Hashem. I am God, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. Right? That's the Tetragrammaton. We may not understand it, but we know that it represents the ultimate truth and that there ultimately are answers to the question. So even if we don't know, we can have the faith and the trust in Hashem that Hashem is running the world. And just as God responded to Moshe back then, that now is the time where you're going to be freed from your exile. And I'm going to take you out of your pain. I'm going to take you out of your suffering. I'm going to bring you to the land of Israel. And you're going to be a free people. That we should know that God is answering that to each and every one of us in our own pain, in our own challenges, in our own suffering. That God is answering each and every one of us that he will take us out. He will take us out of the pain. Have the faith and the trust in Hashem. There will be an end to the suffering. Mashiach will come. This is what has gotten us through, and this is what will get us through until ultimately Mashiach will come. And as the prophet Isaiah says, we'll have the answers. Then we'll understand why we had to go through the pain and the suffering. But we have to have the faith and the trust in Hashem that Hashem will take us out of the exile and the challenges. All right. Questions, comments, thoughts on this week's class? I know it's a lot of material being packed into a very short amount of time. Right, looks like a bunch of satisfied customers.